All right, so I'm going to work on just doing a walkthrough for practice quiz number one. Let's see, this one, we are going to take in numbers from the user until they enter -1, at which point we'll stop. For each number, we're going to say whether it's odd or even, and then also after they hit -1, we should print a count of the even or odd numbers that were entered. All right, so this one's, okay, so we need to, okay, I'll do most of this and I'll come back for some of this. There's a couple different ways you can do this. I'm going to start out with just a while true loop. And I'm just going to take in some numbers. Int number is equal to integer. If you don't remember how to, I'm going to expect that you memorize this. But if you use like your old code, I would just copy and paste this in here. First thing I would do is I'm going to check to see if I'm taking a number from the user. And the first thing we need to do is just see if it's -1. If it's -1, then we should break. Okay. Otherwise, we'll keep going. And so, all right. Let's see, I'm going to come back to this part. I'll do this part at the end. But for now, we're just going to see whether it's even or odd. That just means we need to check to see if mod 2 is going to be 0 or not. So we're going to say if number mod 2 is 0, that's going to be even. So that we should say it is even, something like that. And then we can say otherwise. I don't know why it's doing all that. Else, same thing, but odd. All right, so that should work. We can try and run this and test it. I need that. I didn't put any prompts or anything. I should probably put some prompts in here. As soon as we hit -1, it's going to exit. All right, so we have most of it done here. I am going to add in a prompt. I think for asking for a number, we should always give a prompt. All right, now the last thing we need to do in here is probably the trickiest part based on student kind of feedback is printing out the number of even and odds. So what we should really do up here is just declare a variable called like even, how about number of evens? And to begin with, it's going to be 0. We can say number of odds. It's also going to be 0. Okay, and now as we do our loop, instead of just saying that's even here, so we're going to, these are like our variables that are going to keep track of how many even or odd numbers we have. To begin with, before we start our loop, we don't have any evens or odds, so we'll just say 0, 0. Now we'll say inside of our loop, when we do our conditional statement, we're going to check to see if it's even, the number of evens should increase by 1. And same thing, if it's odd, number of odds should increase by 1. And then if we go down into here, we can do, at the very end, we're just going to say, I don't know, there were, how about like number of odd numbers? And then this should just be number of odds. And same thing down here. I'm going to add this, put that in here, and then we'll say number of evens. And now if we run our code, update it, 5, 6, 1. Actually, I don't like that it's constantly spamming this, so I'd probably put this outside the loop. I don't like that it's always there, but that's fine. When we say -1, it's going to exit and do that. I don't like the fact that it's like, anyways, that's fine for doing the quiz. I might probably move this out just so it's just there once, but it doesn't really matter for the quiz. So that's how we do this one. Let's move on to the next. All right, moving on into the next quiz. This is pretty similar to the first one. So we're going to enter numbers from the user until they enter -1. We're keeping track of the high and low test scores. And then when they print -1, we're going to say, just going to identify which ones were the highest and lows. All right, so for this one, I am just going to copy some code from my previous quiz because a lot of the stuff is kind of the same. I'm going to do my while true loop, my breaking thing. I think all that's about the same. I didn't need to add another bracket because I didn't catch the closing bracket for this while loop, but this is about right. All right. And then we need to enter, we just need to keep track of which ones are the highs and which ones are the lows. So what we should do in here is have a variable called like, we just need to check like int high. I'm going to make a variable called high or like highest score. Let's spell it out here. And I'm going to say to begin with, I'm going to set that value to be very low. I might even do like a -10,000. Because I want to say, to begin with, like my highest score is something that's very small. And eventually, as I enter new scores, I want to update this value to be more accurate. So I'll start with that. I'm going to say highest score is like -that. I'm going to say lowest score. I'm doing it kind of like the opposite, right? I'm going to say that the lowest score is a very large number, and the lowest score is I'm going to say that the highest score is a very low number, and I'm going to say the lowest number is a very high number. Lowest score is a very high number. All right, and then what we're going to do here, we're going to take in a value from the user. If the number is -1, we should break. And then otherwise, we need to check. And we just say, like, okay, is this new number I got is this new number that I got in bigger than my current high score? If it is, then my high score needs to be updated. So I need to say something like, if highest score, how about this new value, if number is bigger than my highest score, right? So if I pass in a value of, like, I don't know, current high score is -100,000. So if I get in a value of like 5, -100,000 is no longer the high score, 5 is. So what I would do is I would just say, well, highest score is no longer whatever value it had previously. Right now, it's just number. And similarly, we could move on. We could say if the number we get in is smaller than the lowest score, then again, the lowest score is no longer this value. It's whatever stored in number. So we'll say lowest score is equal to number. Okay. And then at the very end, we'll just do, we'll kind of print out our results. We're going to say high score is like that. Whatever value ends up getting stored in the high score variable is going to be our high. And our lowest is going to be whatever's left over inside lowest score. All right, so and then we want to run this. We're going to update, we're going to run this. And we're going to say like 5, 100. Oh, I messed that up. Anyways, this will work. Maybe you can trust me, but I'll just show it running. 5, 100, 200, -5, and then say -1. So when I run this, the highest score should be 200, lowest score should be -5 if I did this correctly, and it looks like it works. Okay, so just I think in both of these, what these have in common is just keeping track, using another variable to keep track of, you know, even or odd numbers, using another variable to keep track of the highest and lowest scores. Really common thing that you need to do when you're coding. All right, and we're going to do the last of our 3 loop quizzes. This one's pretty similar to the last one. Kind of, I think it's similar to actually both the previous 2. We're taking code. It's going to take in test scores from the user as integers until they enter -1. We're going to add in the thing that's a little bit different from the previous 2 is we're going to make sure the values are between 0 and 100. And if they enter a invalid number, we're going to ask them to re-enter the value. And then keep track of the number of tests. So this is the new part. We haven't really done something like this before, at least in these 2 previous quizzes. This, though, keep track of passing and failing grades. That's definitely something that's kind of like the even or odds. Like we're going to check some conditions. If this is true, increase this. If this is true, increase that. And similarly, -1. So a lot of similar things here. The biggest difference is going to be this. So since we have a lot of similarities, let us go find where I put this thing at. Let's see. Let's take in this part from our previous code. And let's put that in here. So we start with a while true loop. We are going to do that. Taking a value, taking a number from the user. If it's -1, we should break. Otherwise, if it's not, let's do some stuff. Let's see. One thing we need to do is we need to make sure, excuse me, for this one, we need to check and make sure the number is between 0 and 100. So let's see. I'm going to do this. I'll show you 2 different ways you could do this. I'm going to say if the number is, if this number that we enter is less than 0, or if this number that we get is greater than 100, I'm going to say system out print, and we're going to say enter a invalid number. Let's see. And let's try and use continue in here. And let's just test to see if it's going to work the way I think it should. We're going to print otherwise, like, I'm going to say number was okay. This is just my test. I just want to see if this thing's working appropriately. This might be a good thing for you too in your quiz, like getting part of this done, seeing if it works, and then moving on to the next. I think this should work appropriately. I very rarely use continue in my code, but I want to try it out here because I think this is a good use for it. So if we enter 5, number's okay. Number's okay, but let's try it 101. See, it's going to say invalid number, and then it's going to go back and continue to wait for us to enter numbers. So what the continue is going to do is it's going to skip the running of anything after this, and it's just going to start the next loop. Okay, so continue is a nice one to use in here. I can do some other stuff. If I didn't want to do that, I could delete this and then say, if the number's in there, say invalid number, and then we can add in like else, do some other stuff. So let's see. So I'll try and continue with this one. Just means that all of our code then has to live inside this else block, which is maybe not the best, but it doesn't really matter ultimately. All right, we need to keep track of passing and failing grades. So same thing, I need to make a variable up here, passing number, let's say that, passing number is 0 to begin with, and we'll say int failing number is also 0 to begin with. And now, as we go through here, all we need to do, inside this else statement, we're going to check to see now if the number that we entered was, I'm going to say greater than or equal to 60. It says a grade below 60, so presumably 60 and up will be passing. If the number is greater than or equal to 60, we should say passing number plus plus. Otherwise, we're going to say failing number plus plus. And then at the end, we just need to print out our kind of, format this and get rid of these spaces. Good. Otherwise, outside the loop, we can say something like not print number of passing number. And we could also say number of failing number. Okay. Now if we run this, everything should work appropriately. So let's say like we've got a, let's say 61, 60, 59, and then we'll do like 101. Okay, so this should show that we have 2 passing, 1 failing. Let's hit -1, number of passing 2, number of failing 1. There we go. So those are 3 practice quizzes for our upcoming quiz on loops. They all kind of have some similar things here, keeping in mind, when do I need to create a new variable in order to, do I need to store some data? I might need to make a new variable. And I think that's one of the tricky things about learning to code and trying to figure out when do I need to make a new variable. So if I need to store something, if I need to save a value, think about making a variable.